even though you may not be having a full-fledged program, by the mere fact that you are engaging with elected officials, you're doing advocacy. You just don't have an agenda yet. You just don't have a full-fledged program. So the questions and the things we're going to talk about a little bit are, why you should be involved and how to do that. How many of you have boards that are skeptical of, right? So the easiest way, I think there are a lot of boards that are afraid of it. Charlie, you guys probably have a board or members on the board as well that are a little skeptical sometimes about things that you guys do. I think the trick is, whether it's a board or whether it's your advocacy committees, is finding people who can step out of their role as CEO or whatever it is for their company and serve for the good of the organization and the community, and put those interests before their own self-interest. And a lot of times that can get tricky, and that's why I think you'll have boards that are a little hesitant, because they're not sure about whether they're making the right positions, because it might benefit ExxonMobil, but if it's benefiting ExxonMobil, it's benefiting the community as a whole more so than it's just benefiting ExxonMobil, just for an example. So I'll let Charlie talk a little bit about some of this stuff, and then we'll keep going.
So whether you think about it or not, policy affects your membership every day. It creates the climate in which you operate, whether that's at the federal, state, or local level. So this is something that is impacting your members. Some of your members, your larger members, are likely to have folks that do focus on this professionally. But a lot of the smaller ones don't. So a lot of businesses will look to their chamber or their industry association for kind of that government affairs policy voice. So this is an opportunity for you to be that voice for your members, to provide additional value to them, whether that's in City Hall, or that's the state capitol, or in the U.S. Capitol. There are ways that you can play a role and provide that value to your members.
And even though I know, how many of you in here are really small chambers? Right, so I know for smaller chambers, the question will always be, but I'm only a 2-person staff or a 3-person staff. I can't afford to hire a lobbyist. I can't afford to hire. So from where I was as a regional chamber, we had a smaller staff. I was it for state, local, and federal. And then I got off of local, and the CEO did that because I really wasn't there all that much focusing on the other stuff. So, but there are ways to do it, even if you can't afford to hire a lobbyist. You don't have to have a lobbyist to engage in advocacy. You don't have to have a full-time government affairs person. The best thing is to know the resources around you, because chambers, as Charlie will say, will look to you as the voice of business for the community. You are the Chamber of Commerce. They want to hear where you are on certain positions and certain issues. For example, last year the Department of Labor rule was a huge issue that came up that impacted everybody, no matter what size you were. So they look to you for that as a resource. So some of the ways that you can do that, so we kind of touched on that a little bit, but some of the ways that you can do that, I would say, as a CEO or staff, do not take a position on behalf of the organization as if it is your position. You always need to have a government affairs committee, be it 2, 5, 3 or 4 or 5 people, or be it 20 or 30. Always have a government affairs committee or a board, if you don't have a government affairs committee, to be able to discuss the positions that are coming up, so that it doesn't become, oh, well, you decided that. That's not what the chamber said. Claire, you wanted to have that. So you always need to have a backstop. So by doing that, look to those issues that matter most to your members in your communities, and then be able to spread the word. Don't pick a ton of issues. There may be things, just like I asked how many of you were doing advocacy, there may be a ton of things that you haven't really even thought of that are impacting day to day. For example, transportation, airport and road and infrastructure concerns, ports, energy issues, education. Those are things that are mainstays, that if you look at the U.S. Chamber's agenda every year, you're going to see those things on there, as well as right now the hot button issue, tax reform. You'll see that up there, and trade. So some of you, trade and agriculture may be really big for your communities. And for others of you, maybe it's energy. But one thing we know as business leaders that's always important to the success of a community is the transportation and infrastructure systems that are in place. How are the roads? Or do they need to be improved? Is there access to the necessary resources that we need to be successful? How is that being able to drive our economy? Is that helping people to secure income in our communities to build business, or is it moving them away? So that's one issue that you can look at always, that you can share that information and try to maybe take a position just on that, for example. Charlie, you want to talk about some of the things that you guys have done?
Absolutely, and in transportation is a great example because it's one that's typically not partisan. It's one that, for instance, in the state of Missouri, there's generally consensus there's a problem. We just don't have consensus on what that solution might be.
Right.
It's an issue at the federal level where we know we need more federal dollars across the country, and then bringing into that into Missouri is a piece of that. In Missouri, we have an underfunded road and bridge system. We have the 7th largest network of roads in the country. Missouri does, but we do not rank that high when it comes to funding. We're in the 40s when it comes to funding of that system. So how we fund that's a problem. We haven't raised the gas tax since the early 90s. As it turns out, the price for everything that we buy with that gas tax has gone up, and fuel efficiency is about doubled. So what that gas tax buys is nowhere near what it was when it was set at that rate. The Missouri Chamber, this has been one of their big focus areas. The Missouri Chamber Federation, which Tammy talked about yesterday, that everybody here can be a part of, where everybody kind of comes together to advocate as chambers, as the business community, side by side. This is one that in the last year we've talked about with the Federation is probably what should be our top priority. And at the St. Louis Regional Chamber, this is certainly something we've talked about, both for Missouri, Illinois, and locally, because a piece of this is putting together that mix of funding, federal, state, and local, that works for your community and for the needs of your community, whether that's transit, roads, bridges, ports, whatever that may be. This is an issue in everybody's community.
And one of the things that the U.S. Chamber is our CEO, Tom Donahue, is very various, and he's got this white hair, and he's in his 70s, and he walks into a room and he may just start cursing immediately. But one of the things he will curse about is we need a gas tax. The federal gas tax has not been raised in years, and so now you see a lot of local communities and states starting to raise whether or not they should raise the gas tax statewide, and because there hasn't been one done federally, and for the same reasons that Charlie has talked about, there's so many infrastructure needs that need to be fixed. And you know, traditionally, Republicans on one end have always hated taxes. No new taxes, right? No, you don't want to raise taxes. And so Tom Donahue has said, you know, this isn't a tax. This is a user fee. You use a road, you need to pay for a road. That's basically how this goes. Because if we can't keep our economy going with the trucks and the trains and the boats that are out there that we need to widen ports that have dredging issues that need to be addressed. You have, you know, 18-wheelers on the roads all the time. And every time you can always tell when you come behind where an 18-wheeler has been and there's a dip in the road, right? So just like he says, it's not a tax, it's a user fee. There are ways to figure out when you're talking about something that makes it relatable to people so that they understand, look, this is something we absolutely need. So whether it's a transportation issue, whether it's a healthcare issue, whether it's an education issue, one of the things that I always say to you, which is why we are talking about having government affairs programs and having that backstop, is to be able to provide statistics. It's one thing to say we need roads and infrastructure. It's another to be able to say why. Here's why we have to have this. You know, 50% of our businesses in our city use these roads, and we need to be able to maintain them so that they are accessible for, you know, whatever transportation companies that need to provide the goods to the rest of the community or the rest of the state. Whatever it is, make sure you have stats to back up whatever you will be supporting. Again, because you can't just decide you want to support something and not be able to know why you're supporting it.
And the good news is there are resources to get that information as well. It's not like we're expecting you to go do some research and figure that out. Reach out to the U.S. Chamber, reach out to the Missouri Chamber, reach out to a regional chamber, whether it's the St. Louis Regional Chamber. If you're in Southeast, reach out to Cape, reach out to the Greater Kansas City Chamber. If you don't have somebody at your office that does government affairs, there's somebody at the chamber that's not that far away that does. And they will have this or will have access to this and can get it to you.
And there's force in numbers. And so if you're from a smaller community that's outside of a larger community, and I can tell you, coming from Louisiana, we were not New Orleans. So some of you probably think that I was in New Orleans. I wasn't New Orleans. So a lot of people always say Louisiana, New Orleans, right? There's certain states. Missouri, they think St. Louis, Kansas City, maybe they think the Cape, maybe. So for us, our challenge was always to fight for the fact that we were a community that was about to have $30 billion worth of LNG economy hit the economy in our area. Nobody knew that. We were a part of the state where we held 40% of the nation's reserves. Nobody knew that. So when we had to go to Washington after Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, because there were two and we were the second one, everybody were, so how are things in New Orleans? I don't know, I'm not from New Orleans. I hear it's pretty bad. But let me tell you how it is in Lake Charles. And then when you started to tell them what that was, it opened the eyes. So what I'm saying to you is, if you are from a smaller community, whether it's at the state level or at the federal level, make sure your elected officials know who you are and know where you are, so that you're not a forgotten voice. So when we say there is strength in numbers, know your regional partners, know them because A, they are resources for you just like we are, but they also can help you to get your voice out there and be known. Because I've seen it, like I said, personally, and I see it happen a lot of times where if there's some tragedy that happens or there's some great thing that happens, somebody else gets the credit for it and you get left out of it. And you want to make sure that you're always out front and center. So having your when you're establishing a program of whatever it is, whether it's one issue that you're going to take advantage of or not, make sure when you adopt your policy that you never catch your elected officials by surprise. Oh, we didn't know you have a policy. Make sure they know what that is. Whether that means when you meet with them, you let them know. Whether it means you have a website that will have your 2017 agenda. Here's the issues that we are supporting. Here are the issues that we are challenging. And make sure that the community knows where you are. And so the good thing about doing that is newsletters, if you do email blasts, or to have that webpage there where that information is readily available. The second part of that goes back to regionalism and extra voices. You can say, we, along with the Cape Girardeau Chamber, we, along with the St. Louis Chamber, have partnered for the state legislative session to fight against Proposition A or whatever it is. And here's why. And then you will put your details of why that is. You don't ever want anybody to be caught off guard or think, again, that you came up with that issue. This is an issue that affects your community, and this is an issue that our members have voiced to us. Some chambers do surveys of their members to see where they are on certain things. What are those top issues in our community that you feel we need to address and advocate for? Some people do it that way. You want to talk about some of the things that you guys do? Yeah,
for us, a lot of it's, we do events that are specifically around policy. So a piece of that is going around the room and ask people what they're dealing with so that we're able to put their issues on our radar in terms of what their top issues are when it comes to policy. That doesn't mean that we're going to adopt those policies, but it means that there may be something that impacts other folks that we should be engaged on that wasn't on our radar. So that's an easy way just to hear from our members about what they're thinking about. And then we've also figured out what our priorities are. So while you may have a little bit of a laundry list of things that may be important or useful policy positions, it's trying to figure out what's your sweet spot. Whether that's because of where your community is or what the top issues are, or it derives from your chamber's strategy, what is that issue or set of issues that's the sweet spot for you and where you are in your chamber. And I would say something Charlie hit on earlier,
look to, because this is what I did, I looked to our state chamber and to the U.S. Chamber, because I knew the U.S. Chamber put out every January a list of, top priorities, basically the business agenda for the year. And I looked at those and thought about the community and thought about our members and went through that and pulled from that and said, okay, Government Affairs Committee, here's some things that are going on nationally. Here's some things that are going on at the state level. There are a lot of other stuff that really doesn't affect us. Maybe that affects somebody else. But here's what I think you guys might want to look at and be interested in from what you've said to us. And so from there, that's how they built the agenda. And so the agenda always, the wheelhouse was always transportation and infrastructure. It was always energy. And it was always education. From time to time, it may delve from that into different things. Like for education, is that, higher ed, or is that going to be, K through 12? Workforce challenges. Again, all of that tied to what that community was. And so think about your community when you're going to have to go to your board or your committee and say, what are those things that we're working on? What are the things that are important to this community we need to focus on? So that you're not focusing on things that don't, the whistle stop bar doesn't mean anything to you. But maybe perhaps somewhere else it does. And making sure, as this is something we just talked about, the all-purpose agenda. So when you do have a position that you and your board and your committees look at and know are important to you, maybe it's small business. What is that to small business? Maybe it's taxes, like we're going through right now. That may change and have to alter a little bit every year because of what's going on in the State House or in DC. But making sure that that agenda is an all-purpose agenda. One that can be tweaked if you have to because of the certain situation. So that you're not in a box where you feel you can't get out of being supportive or non-supportive of a certain issue. Things will change, as you know, or maybe a lot of you probably don't know this, but when a bill comes out, especially in DC, you'll have 100 amendments. And then you wonder, well, why did he support that bill? That sounds like a horrible bill. Like, why would he? Because there's some part of that bill that brings something back to the community. That's why. So you may start out liking a bill, and then by the time the amendments end up on it, you may absolutely hate it. So for them, their decision has to become, what is the most important thing for me? And that is where, as chambers, you are important, right? Because you may have a piece of a bill, be it the State House or in DC, that you really need. I don't care about the overall, I need that. I need you to help me get that. And that's where your voice to those elected officials matters, to where you come up and say, hey, we really, I don't care how you get it done, we really need this done this year. If we don't, we will lose 10,000 jobs in our community. And so when you see that happen, a lot of times you don't know why things are happening the way they are. They're happening because that member has to take a very important vote to save himself in his own community because he knows this is what his constituents have told him he wants. Not because necessarily you would hope it's what they personally want. It's about what's best for their area that they represent. And so one of the things that we want to always focus on is making sure you have that agenda, spreading the word of the agenda. Like I said, whether you have newsletters, whether you have websites, if you're tracking legislation during the session, I'll let Charlie talk a little bit about that, how you do that. If you don't have the resources to do it, we send out a newsletter every now and then. Share that newsletter with your members. You can say, we have not taken a position on this issue, however, we thought this was useful information for you to have. But make sure they get the information, because that's what they look to you for as a resource, whether you took positions on it or not. And I'll let you talk a little bit about that.
And you kind of can think of this as a little bit of a menu. You can start with, we're not going to take any position on any issue, but we're going to inform you on it.
That's right.
So it's not, this is what we think, but this is something we think should be on your radar.
Right.
Whether that's passing along something from the U.S. Chamber, the Missouri Chamber, or Regional Chamber, or somebody else. where you can just provide them information that you think they would find useful. That's the safest play. You can kind of go the next step and take a position and let people know about that and advocate for that a little bit, but maybe not get too in the weeds on that. You can go deeper and actually really engage on the issue and try to work with other folks. So there's kind of the range of how deep do you want to get in it, but there's different ways based upon your time and political sensitivity in terms of how far into that you want to get.
And the safest place is, as Charlie said, to inform. Because what you'll probably see happen is that by informing on these issues, they're starting to see what's happening, they're starting to learn what's going on, and then somebody's going to say, hey, why didn't we take a position on such and such? Well, I don't know. Nobody ever came up to us and said they wanted to take a position on such and such. So even starting there will lead to you probably getting engaged in a level beyond the, just information purposes.
And also, there's also how specific you go in policy. I'm going to steal an analogy from Hart, is the we like puppies statement. Mm-hmm. You can take a position on we like transportation infrastructure, we think we should fund it. I don't think anybody's going to get pissed about that position.
Right.
But how specific you get, we like Dalmatian puppies. Right. Well, then you might start pissing off the collie crowd. So for instance, in Missouri, gas tax is one way to fund this. Toll roads are another. You ever want to send the Warrenton Chamber through the roof just tell them you love toll roads. So how you do that, once you get that more specific, one, it's probably more concrete, possibly more useful, but it also may become a little more controversial, or at least not having that same broad degree of support. So how specific you want to get is up to you, but taking a broad issue position can be fairly safe. It's just how far into the weeds do you want to get?
As the voice of business, and I encourage you all to think of yourselves as that, because that is what you are. You are the voice of the businesses that you represent, that are your members. And as such, what is it that is going to help us to be successful in the space of business and help us to achieve the ability to grow, maintain, and stabilize? And so, be that tax reform, be that workforce development issues, be that energy and infrastructure issues, it will vary from different communities. Some of those things will be the same throughout. And so that's why we encourage you to work regionally. Also, one of the things that I know you'll see a lot of letters to the editor in papers. If you ever get to a point where you take a position, or let's say you're starting to develop an advocacy program and you want to get that word out about why you're doing it, have somebody from your board, one of your volunteers, do a letter to the editor, or go and sit before the editorial board and say, hey, here's why we're going to start an advocacy committee. We're the voice of business. We realize that, in this community, we have 1,500 employees, and we represent those businesses that are here, and those 1,500 businesses create 30,000 jobs. So stats are really good, especially for something like that. But then as you grow and you do start to take positions, you'll be able to use a newspaper editorial board where you can provide that information out to the public for your needs that are there. So we talk about unique ways to get your message out. Some of these are like basic things that you can do. One of the unique things that you can do is host the state of the city, state of the state, addresses where your mayor will come and deliver where things stand at the city level. At the state level, you can do one of two things, or you can do both. You can invite your legislative delegation in to discuss with you what they are going to be working on during the next state session. And at the same time, you can let them know what those priorities that you've heard from your membership is as well. If you do it before the session, then during the session, you can continue to make that known by contacting their offices, contacting them, doing days at the Capitol, which I know some of you do, which are really successful events and are also great funding generators for a lot of the chambers. one of the things that's really important about days at the Capitol or fly-ins to DC, and I'll let you talk a little bit about that, is getting in front of your members where they work. They like to be able to get on the floor and say, and today, my chamber is here. Wait, everybody. They love that. They like to be able to brag. But what they're doing is giving you recognition, especially in smaller communities. It's huge. So you're getting recognition. They're getting something out of it as well. And then at the same time, you can say, you know, Senator Johnson, we really love you and all. However, we believe your position on this is not good for the community. And then be able to tell them why. It's a really good thing to know your elected officials. And by that, not, hi, how are you, good to meet you. But when you walk into a room, they know your name. Just like you walk into a room, they know the same is reversed. Because that means you have a relationship to where you can build some trust and accountability with them to get things done that you want to get done and accomplished at the Capitol. So that at the end of the session, you can invite them and they can discuss what they worked on, what they didn't get accomplished, what they hope to get accomplished next year. You never know. They may be saying something there that you worked on or something that you may see as vitally important to your community that may trigger some of your members to say, hey, we need to jump on board with this for next session. So those are the things that you can do local and statewide. Federal, your members are a little more distant, you may find. You may know who your congressman is. Some of you may not know who your congressman is. Invite them to come and speak to your chamber. I encourage you to do that. The same rules apply there too. They're in Washington from Tuesday to Thursday. We were talking about this earlier. That environment right now, I've never seen it as intense as it is right now. But invite them to come and speak. They love to do that. They love to hear what's going on in their community. There are a lot of things that they aren't aware of because they're a little disconnected from it during the week. Share with them what's happening in your community. New companies that are moving in, new companies that are moving out, why that's happening, what you need federally from them that will help you to help your communities grow. One of the things that Charlie was saying, whether it's local, state, or federal, you will find a lot of times these issues are going to be the same or they're going to be tied and linked together. For example, transportation and infrastructure is going to be tied to federal dollars that come down to the states. We know that for sure. Education is another one. So getting in front of them, making sure they know who you are, your community. They love to come out when recess, recess will start every year. For the summer recess is a really long recess. It's going to start now until right after Labor Day. So have them come out, call their offices and get to know them. Get to know their district staff, which is equally as important, if not more so, because they are there every day in the community. Invite them to come to events. Invite them to come and give updates to your government affairs committees or to your board as to what the member is working on, and then also being able to voice to them your concerns as well. The U.S. Chamber does something called the Spirit of Enterprise Award. Have any of you presented that award in your communities? The Spirit of Enterprise Award is given out every year in the spring to members who vote with the pro-business agenda of the U.S. Chamber. If they voted 70% or above, they will get an award. And so you can present those awards at your chamber. A lot of times the members will either miss the event in DC because of votes, or they come and they get the award and it's really, they come in, it's a cattle call, they stand in a line, hi, how are you? They take their picture and they leave. There's really no greatness about that. But for you, it's an opportunity to have them in your community. They appreciate getting it in their community because it means you're listening and you're watching and pay attention to what they're doing. So I encourage you to do that. I have some little note cards where you'll be able to pull up the votes from this past year. We used to have books, so now we don't have the books anymore. Everything lives online, so you can go state by state and see, and you can pull up the member and click on the member and see how he voted, and then click on each one of those issues and see where they're voted. And that's a good place to start if you're, again, just starting, you're brand new, or you're learning about advocacy, or you're thinking about developing a plan. Those are ways to start because you'll be able to see some of those issues and say, yeah, that might be something we need to watch or we need to follow more closely going into the next year. So those are kind of unique things. When I say we're talking about unique ways, those are unique ways to engage your elected officials, be it giving them awards, honoring your state legislators. You could do that at the end of the year, honor them for the efforts that they made, but don't honor them just to honor them. Honor them if they actually did something to help the community. You don't want to give them an award just to be given an award. You want to give them an award because they actually fought for business. Anything you wanted to add on that?
We actually do an award ceremony at the St. Louis Regional Chamber that we're in the midst of planning right now. And we have two different categories. One is the advocate for the folks that tried, and the champions for the ones that actually got the bill across the finish line.
Right. And there are different ways. You know, some chambers, and I know you guys do that, there are chambers that will track, especially the state chamber will track how people voted. So that they can, that's how you know who's pro-business. That's why we do the award that we do every year. So that we can be able to say, you know, hey, we know how you voted. Now, if you're a smaller organization, and my old organization we tracked, we did not release those scores because we knew it would just cause too much of a drama in the whole community in the region that we were in, so we didn't release it. But internally, the board knew, and the Government Affairs Committee knew where and why those members stood where they stood. So being able to track is a great thing. We talked a little bit about that. These are other resources now that are real big. Having a Facebook page, a Twitter handle, where you can also share information and learn information from others. And this is, again, just little examples of how that's done. But again, I would really encourage regionalism and regional abilities to work together. And I'm going to have Kim talk a little bit about the FlyIn, because when we're talking about unique events and those sorts of things, FlyIns, I know a lot of you probably don't have the budgets for them. And if you're in a smaller community, partner together and do them either here or into DC, because they're really, really important to get to know the staff, as I mentioned earlier, who are extremely important in crafting legislation, and have the members here. Getting to know them just as much as getting to know the member. You never know when you may have a company that has a great story to tell that could go and testify in Washington or here about something that's going on in your community that affects the state. You want to talk a little about FlyIn?
So we did this with our leading partners. Back to our partnership program, our leading partners, we were trying to find something that would be meaningful to them. And so the first year we did it, which was 2016, we did a DC FlyIn. So basically what we did is we included all of the cost in that in their partnership dollars that they paid us. So it was an expensive thing, but we went in that group. We have 2 healthcare facilities, 2 of the major banks in our area, a media outlet, and our casino. And so we went to those folks and said, and I didn't get to go because I was at our other conference, but we went to those folks and said, okay, this is what we're planning. Tell us who are the people you need to be in front of while we're there, and we'll try to coordinate that. And so that's what they did, and it went over so well. They were so impressed with it. I think they were there like 2 days, maybe. It was a quick trip. And then this year, we brought them to Jeff City and did the same thing. And basically what we did is we allowed one representative from each one of those partners to go in, so that we would pay for. If anybody else wanted to go, we allowed them to do that with extra money. But we did Jeff City this year, and then we're talking about eventually doing a DC FlyIn for our membership with something that we would offer to them if they wanted to do that. But we haven't gotten to that point yet.
And I know the Missouri Chamber started a couple of years ago, the FlyIns, and I know some of you have been on those trips, and you've been recently.
I haven't.
You haven't. Who's been on that trip with the Missouri, the rest of Missouri chambers?
Tim Arbiter was talking about it last night.
Yeah, last night. Yeah. Those trips, and even when you go as a group like that, you can meet with your congressional member independently. And it doesn't matter. You know, some groups we have. In September, we have 8 FlyIns in the same week. 3 of them are state chamber FlyIns, and the largest one is Oklahoma. They usually bring about 100 people. And the smallest one that we have going that week is about 8. So it doesn't matter the size. It matters that you go. Obviously, if you tie, it's going to be a moneymaker for you. and a good revenue generator if you tie it to something, or do it independently as an independent fly-in for your membership. But the key is to go, and the key is to be vocal and seen and have a presence, because then they know and remember your community as being one that cares, and knowing those business interest needs that are there for the community.
How many of your chambers have done, either on your own or in collaboration with somebody else, a lobby day to Jefferson City? How many of you have done a fly into DC?
Did, but I didn't
Okay. How big is your
go.
chamber?
I did not go. We have 500 members.
Staff?
Five.
How big is your chamber, Michaela? Staff?
We have 2 staff and 400 members.
Yeah, so if they can do a fly-in, you guys probably could think about that.
And maybe it's just the board at first, or maybe it's the board chair and the government affairs chair. Or, maybe if it's a specific issue, maybe it's on small business, you take the small business chair, whatever it is, the thing is to go. And they love to go to DC. People love to be up there and see the Capitol and be, in the midst of everything that's going on, to get to sit down and listen to the debates that are going on in the House chamber and the Senate chamber for a little while, are great. To tour the city, to get to meet with people in the administration, whether it's Department of Interior, Department of Education. Some people go and meet with NASA, depending on, whatever issues they have. It helps them to also connect with the real world. I like to say, John and I live in the real world. We have an office in the real world in Dallas. They are disconnected in DC. There is a definite disconnect from reality a lot of times, because you have staff that basically live on the Hill. I mean, they're there. They're not there from 8 to 5. They're there 12, 14-hour days, and they may be a little disconnected from reality because they know policy, know it very well. Our policy folks are great, but they don't always know what's really happening in the communities because they don't have that interaction and that connection and ability to know that. If you share the materials from the regional chambers, or you share it from us or from the state chamber, we get a lot of times, well, your branch office in St. Louis, no, we don't have a branch. We have a regional office, our own. Every chamber is different. You've seen one chamber, you've seen one chamber. But the whole mission of chambers is to be that voice for their communities, right? And so collectively, chambers will all be that and have that special bond and that ability to raise the bar. But let them know, because it will come up, especially in election years, not till next year, but it'll come up. And so I will say it now. The U.S. Chamber endorses somebody and you get a call about, well, you are a branch of the U.S. Chamber. No, we are not. We are members of the U.S. Chamber, just like there are several other chambers across the country that are members, but we are not a branch of the U.S. Chamber. And just because they take a position on something doesn't mean we take a position on something, which is why I say, look at those policy agendas. Don't take positions on, you know what, I'll go for one right now. What's going on in Texas? The bathroom bill. I don't care about the bathroom bill. That, to me, in Columbia means nothing. However, transportation and infrastructure does mean something. So I'm going to focus on that. So that way, if somebody comes to you and says, well, the state chamber took a position on the bathroom bill, which is happening right now in Texas. Yeah, so what? I don't care. They took a position on that based upon something that is going on in their membership. While we are a member of theirs, apparently that doesn't affect our membership, because I haven't heard it from you. So we are focusing only on those things that are important to our chamber and our membership. And so being able to make that distinction, a lot of times it's going to come up to be able to do that. Look, we are partners. We partner where we have to. We partner where it's necessary. We get information from the U.S. Chamber and from the state chamber that is extremely helpful. But we're not going to have our agenda. It's not going to be the same as their agenda. And so our agenda is our agenda. And we hope that you will follow that and appreciate what that is.
And different memberships may come to different conclusions. There's at least one instance I can think of from a couple of years ago where the Missouri Chamber testified in opposition to a bill, and we followed right behind and testified in favor of the bill.
Right.
We let them know that in advance. You don't want to surprise each other.
Hey,
That's not good.
Hey, I'm here to, that's what I'm into today.
But, you can reasonably disagree, but maybe just make sure they know that in advance.
Right.
But that happens, not very often, but on occasion, different memberships will lead to different conclusions, and that's okay.
Jake kept talking to me afterwards, so it was all right.
Yeah.
You weren't throwing anything at each other? Yeah. So you're gonna agree to disagree on some things. The thing is to do it cordially, and the thing is to be aware of it in advance. But where you can partner. And do that often, because there's more in having many voices speaking the same, as opposed to having one voice speaking only.